Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this really special LinkedIn Live session. We're also broadcasting to Instagram and YouTube, so hopefully you're catching us on there soon. And whilst out attending a couple of events over the last couple of months, two worlds collided, essentially. I was attending an event held by Baringa, who are a London-based global consultancy firm, and they were hosting a roundtable discussion talking about the recent changes in the UK law around Workers' Protection Act and what employers are now legally bound to do to protect their workforce. And I was actually really blown away by, what Baringa were doing in this space. They were going above and beyond to make sure that their staff were safe, not just in their working sites, but those of their clients as well, and traveling to and from work. And it was there that I met Aisha, who joins us from Ida today. And fast forward a few weeks, and I was at a We Are the City and Knit networking events. And this is where a lot of inclusion specialists, those kind of looking forward, kind of in a forward-looking trend within inclusion, kind of come together to discuss key topics. And it was at that event that we started talking about what the key trends are for employers and what they should be doubling down on in 2025 and beyond. And one of those was a real rise in the provision for those affected by domestic abuse. 1 in 5 employers are experiencing or will experience domestic abuse in their lives. And it's not just those who are affected, it's the workplaces across the country. So everyone knows someone who is affected by domestic abuse. You may work with them, but the work that we do within our workplaces and keeping them safe is really important. So firstly, I want to thank Aisha so much and the team at IDA for taking the time to prepare this session. I also want to thank Sam, who I will ask to introduce herself in a moment. And there she's going to be sharing her story and the amazing work that she does in this space. For me personally, this is a really important topic. I feel like we really need to create spaces where people feel that they are safe and they can ask for help. So it's really important that I also share that this episode does come with a trigger warning. And if you need any support, or if you've been affected by anything we talk about today, please reach out and we're going to signpost you to some support as well. We'll also be sharing resources. There's a live stream in terms of questions. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can bring them up onto the stage and answer them in real time. So I suppose with no further ado, that's probably the longest introduction I've ever done on one of these sessions, but please over to the both of you to introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you for having us on the session today. It's really great to be here. I'm Aisha from IDA, the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse. I'm the head of membership and engagement at IDA, so kind of managing our memberships, making sure that employers are equipped with information to support their employees impacted by domestic abuse, along with our team of 5 who are supported by our group of ambassadors, of whom Sam is one of. We have a board of trustees and we also have an advisory council as well and volunteer. So lots of people supporting the organisation. Just for background, before joining IDA, I was an IDVA, an independent domestic violence advocate, so supporting people who are impacted by domestic abuse. I was working in the City of London, so I was able to support people during their working day, go into their workplaces quite covertly and provide them with that support. So really seeing the impact it can have when an employer enables their employees to access support through their working day and provides them with that support. So I moved over to IDA to be more on the preventative side. So yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Sally, for this opportunity of sharing my lived experience today. So I'm Sam Billingham. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse and I'm an advocate for survivors of domestic abuse, raising awareness of coercive control and its impact. And I'm also an ambassador for IDA as well.
Fantastic, brilliant. So I think we're going to be going over to you, Aisha, to just share what amazing work IDA do.
Great, thank you. So IDA is a charity. We are we were set up in 2017 to support employers to support their employees who might be impacted by domestic abuse. So really it's raising awareness of this idea that work could be somebody's only safe place if they're experiencing domestic abuse, and a safe, accessible way for somebody to access support, potentially away from the abusive person in that physically safe place or psychologically safe place. Why was IDA set up? So employers have a legal duty of care to safeguard their employees, and it's stated within the Domestic Abuse Act, the statutory guidance that comes alongside that, that they should consider the impact of domestic abuse when they're thinking about that duty of care. As Sally mentioned, the Worker Protection Act and the work going on within that space as well. Employers now have a legal duty of care to actively prevent sexual harassment happening in the workplace, which includes third parties. There's obviously crossovers there with the work around domestic abuse. There's various other kind of things going on in government around the Employment Rights Bill. So there's considerations as to whether that legal duty to actively prevent sexual harassment will actually be increased slightly to become taking all reasonable steps. So an employer has an even increased duty to actually safeguard employees. There's talk around whether statutory paid leave will be brought in as well. So there's more and more conversations happening around the employer responsibility, specifically around domestic abuse. So we are really there to support those employers to implement those duties and safeguard people. It's really important for our reach being over, it says 1,900 members there, but we're actually nearly at 2,000 members. We've got a massive reach, and it's all about, across the UK, employers coming together to be part of the network to put in processes, procedures, support in place, and really being able to learn from each other. So IDA is free to join. There's no barriers for any organisation to join. We are funded by our beacons and our strategic partner members. That's really important for us as an organisation to be able to keep it free for SMEs and for third-party sector organisations and those who potentially couldn't afford to pay for it. So we are funded by larger organisations who we provide more support with, who are really committed to kind of using their platform to enable smaller organisations to benefit from the resources and information. We have also recently just launched a HR charter against domestic abuse. So this is a charter specifically for HR professionals. So they can join the charter and they can make a commitment as an individual that they will raise awareness of domestic abuse. They will encourage their workplace to join IDA and implement this support, and they will take that commitment wherever they are within any organisation, and then that gives them access to all of our resources and invitations to our events and things as well. So I'd encourage any HR professionals on the call to have a look at that.
Fantastic.
If we go on to the next slide, I'll talk about what we do at IDA. So essentially we do 4 things. We raise awareness of what domestic abuse is and why it's a workplace issue. So kind of coming into different strands here. So first of all, fundamentally, people don't know what domestic abuse is. That there's a lot of misconceptions and sort of lack of understanding around it. So really helping people to understand what it is, to recognise it in colleagues, and also to identify it in themselves as well. And then also to help employers, business leaders to understand why it is a workplace issue. We provide tools and resources. So we have lots of different resources available on the website. The main kind of one we signpost people to is the IDA Handbook, which is essentially a step-by-step guide about how to implement a domestic abuse response. And I'll talk more at the end around the kind of the 4-phase approach that we talk through in that handbook. We have a domestic abuse policy template, so that's updated yearly. It goes through a yearly legal review, and it provides employers with that template to take and chop and change as they like to be able to introduce their own policy. We really do encourage employers to introduce a domestic abuse policy or some sort of written guidance, as it provides consistency across the organisation. So no matter who you are line managed by, your relationship with your line manager, you're going to be able to access that support and you know what you're entitled to. It also provides an individual who's going through domestic abuse that element of control. Think about somebody who is going through coercive control and they have limited control over their own life and their decisions, being able to see what support is available before they decide whether to speak out, share their experiences and get that support, it can be quite empowering for the individual. So it can sort of set a very clear precedence as to the organisation's response and approach to domestic abuse. We have information around addressing perpetrators, around managing and handling disclosures, GDPR considerations, so loads and loads of information and resources, and all very kind of carefully thought out with input from people in the legal sector, domestic abuse sector, survivors, etc. We also do events as well. So we have our webinars and we have our in-person events. So plenty of opportunities for people to meet other employers. The third thing we do is we connect employers to each other. So we've got a massive network, as I said, we've got nearly 2,000 employers. There's some really brilliant pieces of work going on amongst organisations, and we provide we kind of describe ourselves as the convener or a hub of employers. So we're able to introduce those employers with each other where they're having similar challenges or they need support around perhaps setting up a working group or questions around how they introduce champions. You know, we can link them together, and they have opportunities to meet at the IDA events as well. We've also started doing some sector-led roundtables, so they can also meet at the roundtable events. And then the final thing we do is we work with government, we work with the domestic abuse sector, and we work with academics. So I mentioned some of the work that we did around, mentioned some of the sort of legislation. We have been involved in some advocacy around changing legislation with government. We've provided some input around the VAUG strategy, and we work with the domestic abuse sector as well to bring in the expert knowledge from various organisations. It's really important for employers to think about that, thinking about the different types of people that work within their organisation and how they can provide support to everybody. So having that sort of intersectional lens in the support they offer and bringing in those specialist services that can provide that information.
Fantastic.
We go on to the next slide. We just talk through some of the statistics. So some people on the call may be aware of some of the statistics around domestic abuse, but they're to start with the prevalence of it. So 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be impacted by domestic abuse in their lifetime. Now, this is thinking about people who are currently in abusive situations, people who have experienced domestic abuse at some point in their lives and are perhaps living with the trauma they may be safe, but are perhaps living with the trauma of the abuse they've experienced and the long-term impacts, or people who are going through post-separation abuse. So we know that when an abusive situation or relationship ends, the abuse doesn't stop. And in fact, that's when it can become most dangerous, because that's when the abusive person loses control of the victim survivor. So the ongoing support and the need to understand that long-term impact is really important. So if you just think about the number of people that work within your organisations, you will have people that are impacted by domestic abuse or have had some experience. So it's really important that you raise awareness and you understand what domestic abuse is, and you start to introduce some of these supports some of these support services and things to support people. 56% of employers said that domestic abuse led to absenteeism. So it's having a real impact on people's ability to do their job. This could be a result of somebody having visible physical injuries and not wanting to come into the workplace. It could be that somebody doesn't feel able to work due to the cause of the domestic abuse. So they may have mental health issues that have derived as a result of the abuse, or they may be physically stopped from coming into the workplace by the perpetrator. So lots of different reasons, and we need to think about this as to reasons why somebody isn't coming into work. 2.3 million people were impacted by domestic abuse in 2024. That's in England and Wales. So again, a huge number, and really just there isn't that kind of recognition or understanding of the prevalence of it within society. The cost of domestic abuse, direct cost to businesses in 2022 in England alone was at 17 billion. So this is a huge number and really just speaks to why this is a workplace issue. It's having a direct impact on the cost to the business. So, you know, thinking about what can be put in place to support people to prevent that from happening. and 85 billion was the estimated cost to the economy in 2024 as a result of domestic abuse. So again, a huge number. And then thinking about the prevalence of domestic abuse here, you've got the 5% statistic, which was came out of a piece of research that Vodafone did in 2019, which was that only 5% of employers were said to have a specific domestic abuse policy. Now, incredibly low when you see the numbers. We're hoping that's slightly higher now. And a small plug here, but we are doing a member survey, actually going to be putting it out next week to try and get a bit more better understanding of our member base and who now has a policy or written guidance in place to have a bit more of an update on that statistic.
Wow. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about those statistics? Because, I mean, they are absolutely shocking. And I think, you know, when you see it there, I mean, it's not in black and white, but when you see it in black and white, you think, my goodness, how many people are being impacted? In terms of like the 2.3 million who have been impacted in 2024, are you seeing those numbers increase year on year?
They are increasing. I think the increase needs to be thought of as well as that people are reporting it and are disclosing the abuse that's happening. We know that it's happening and it's very hidden. It's hidden in plain sight. And the fact those numbers are increasing, it's shocking. You know, you need a more kind of robust investigation into why that is happening, but we see it as a positive thing when you think about the number of people that are impacted. When you're working in this space and you see and you hear about it, so many people don't recognize that they are in abusive relationships. It's so common when you start working in this space and speaking to survivors. And you know, a lot of the IDA ambassadors, Sam, you know, I'm sure that you'll talk to this point around sort of the time it takes to re-recognize that. So the fact that it's increasing is perhaps a raising of awareness of what it is, and an increase in people feeling able to support to disclose.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. I've got some other questions, but I think we're going to cover them in it. So I will pause there and I'll let you carry on. Apologies. But yeah, I just think...
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Taking a moment and actually just taking some of those in is just, it's quite staggering.
Yeah. Just one more slide and then I will, hand back to you, Sally. So just in terms of the employer's role in context here, just to highlight really why this is a business issue. So we have covered some of the statistics there, but again, as Sally said, just to really let those sink in, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men impacted. So again, just think about the number of people in your organisations and the kind of the ripple effect as well that domestic abuse has to people, you know, their children, potentially their family members, friends, colleagues will also be impacted by it. So sort of to the point that I just made, really, if you're having people that are disclosing or talking about their experiences of domestic abuse, it's a really positive thing for an organisation to have that. It shows that people feel that it's a positive workplace culture. It shows that people trust and have confidence in the organisation. Again, it's happening. So if people are able to talk about their experiences, you know, that it takes a lot for somebody to really be able to get to a point where they're able to speak out, where they trust the person to do that. On average, somebody will experience around 35 to 50 incidents of domestic abuse before they get to a point of feeling able to speak out about it. So they may have been experiencing that for many years before getting to that point. So, you know, if you're an individual that somebody has disclosed to, it means that they trust you and they have confidence in you, that you're going to be able to listen, you know, not judge them and believe them. In terms of for the business, so I mentioned the statistic for the number before, 17 billion, obviously a massive number. So this is about decreased productivity. It's about people having time off work, lost wages and sick pay. That's what the figure is. For organisations who are providing that support, it will reduce the cost of that domestic abuse to the business, because people are able to access that support and they're able to then come to work and, you know, feel able to perform at work. Raising awareness of domestic abuse will also prevent that cost to businesses, because people may be able to identify it in themselves before it happens or before it gets to the point of them needing to have that time off work or that, you know, that decreased having that decreased productivity. So really enabling someone to identify early on in themselves can save money, and it can also save lives. So it's a massive impact that an employer can have. And then to the recruitment and retention of staff as well. You know, if people want to work for an employer who cares about them, and if you can include the domestic abuse response and processes within your recruitment processes, within onboarding, you know, it shows to people that you really do care, and you'll attract and retain, you know, a sort of higher pool of talent as well. And then for society, so I mean, these figures are shocking. Over 2 women are every week, and 60 men per year are killed by a former partner or ex-partner, a partner or ex-partner. And you know, the numbers around the number of people who die by suicide as a result of domestic abuse are increasing and becoming more understanding and awareness of as well. So huge numbers, and just speaks to the fact this is a societal issue and not just for one organisation to deal with. It needs a whole societal response.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. I really, really appreciate that. And hopefully some, you know, some really, sobering facts, but also hopefully, you know, there's a real kind of call to action that we're going to talk about a little bit later on as to how employers across the UK can really get involved. So thank you, Aisha. I really appreciate that. So Sam, over to you. I would love you to, share your lived experience. I also want to thank you for doing so on this platform. We really, really appreciate it. And to hear, you know, your experience and your story is going to be really, really powerful for people. So again, a trigger warning, if you need any support, then please do reach out. But yes, Sam, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Sally. Would you be able to just put my picture on the screen as well, please? I'll talk a lot about coercive control when we're talking about domestic abuse, and I think this picture here highlights the impact of coercive control. So when I deliver my training, I usually get the audience to try and guess how old I am there as to how old I am now. So there, I'm around 24 years old. I am now 45. I was 45 on Friday. So that just shows the impact of pure power and control. There's no visible injuries, there's no bruises or anything. That is the impact of existing with someone who controls every single aspect of your life. And I'm really passionate about raising awareness of coercive control when we talk about domestic abuse, because I think all too often when we do hear the term domestic abuse, we naturally think about the physical violence that happens in that situation. But for those who know me, I often say, if we're not talking about coercive control, we're not talking about domestic abuse, because it's there at the beginning and it's there at the end. So the Friday night I met the perpetrator. When I first met him in the pub, he didn't punch me in the face. He wasn't physically violent towards me. He was very charming. He was very caring. He seemed really, really popular. Everyone in the pub knew him. When I first saw him, I was instantly attracted to him. Within 5-10 minutes, I was sitting at his table with him and his friend, and we were having a conversation. There was no indication whatsoever that this person would hurt me in any way. I wasn't frightened or intimidated by him. And looking back now, I believe that the coercive control started as soon as I sat next to him and we started having a conversation. So like we do in normal everyday life, we talk to people, we tell them where we live, what we do for a living, and we give them a little bit about ourselves. And that's exactly what I did with this person that I met. And I moved into his flat with him 2 weeks after I met him. So that's what we now know as love bombing. So that's when something very, very quickly happens in the situation and things move very, very quickly. I was living at home at the time. I was a legal secretary. I had an amazing job. I had amazing friends. I had an amazing life. And then I just met this person. And then 2 weeks later, I moved into his flat with him. And again, there was no indication whatsoever that he would hurt me in any way, because there was no physical violence at the beginning. It all started very, very subtly. And when we talk about coercive control, there's often a really thin line between what coercive control looks like and care, because I think Aisha mentioned that we don't know what's happening to us. I didn't have a clue what domestic abuse was, and I certainly didn't know what coercive control was. And because it's not physical, because you can't actually feel anything or necessarily see anything, it's really difficult to identify what's happening. So it started very, very subtly, right at the honeymoon stage of the situation. And it was as simple as, don't go and see your mum tonight. if you love me, you won't go. And it's at that point where everything's new and exciting and you genuinely want to spend time with each other. So I didn't see my mum that night. And it was after that point that I saw my mum less and less. I started going out less and less as well. And it's really, really subtle that you don't notice anything different. And it was only when his behaviour changed that I noticed that something wasn't quite right. But at that point, you still don't know anything, so you can't open up to anyone because you don't understand what's happening. So there was always a consequence for every action that I took. So of course I phoned my mum, of course I stayed in touch with her, of course I went out with friends, but there was always a consequence that I would have to pay. So for me, in that situation, my phone was controlled completely. He would time me when I went to the toilet. So he would be standing outside the toilet door, looking at his watch, and then he'd be verbally abusive because I'd phoned my mum. On one occasion, he got out of bed early one morning. Normally, you would think that your partner's just going to the toilet. My instant reaction was to reach for my phone, which was on silent and on the bedside table. I scrambled to put the volume on. I had a feeling he was going to ring my phone, which he did. And because he couldn't hear the phone ring out, he stormed into the bedroom, picked me up, threw me across the room and threw the mobile phone out the 7th floor window, again being verbally abusive because I'd phoned my mum. Same with social life. I was dressed up one Friday night to go out with a girlfriend to a pub which was literally 5 minutes away from where we lived. By the time I got into the pub, he just bombarded me with so many phone calls, text messages and voicemails demanding to know where I was, who I was talking to. And then he would say things like, if you love me, you wouldn't have left me on my own. You're only out dressed like that to attract attention from other men. Didn't even manage to have a sip of my first drink. It was just much easier to go home. And again, during that situation, of course I went out. Of course I went to see my friends. On one occasion, when I came back to the flat, he would make me take off my underwear so he could smell to see if I'd had sex with anyone that night. So again, I didn't go out because it was just easier to stay at home. Those are horrendous things to happen to anyone. But for me, the biggest thing that happened to me was when I lost my job. So he locked me in the flat. He wouldn't let me out. He threw another mobile phone out the 7th floor window so I couldn't even phone in work. I was all suited and booted to go to work, and he'd always said to me the most strangest thing, which was the only way I'd got my job was by sleeping with my boss, because someone as young as me couldn't get a job as a legal secretary. And again, at the time, I just thought, what an odd thing to say. But he locked me in the flat and I couldn't get to work. When I did manage to get to work 2 days later, it was really, really difficult because I had to try and explain to my boss what was happening behind closed doors. But there wasn't necessarily anything for me to show my boss. There was no bruises, there was no nothing. And when I did manage to get to my workplace and speak to my boss, it was so hard to make that disclosure because you're full of so many emotions. I felt, really embarrassed, really ashamed. I was really scared. I didn't know what was happening and I didn't know how my boss would react. And when I did tell him, he just threw his arms up in the air and his words were, I don't want to know, I don't want to listen, you're sacked. So I was actually sacked from making a domestic abuse disclosure. This was almost 20 years ago, and I would like to think now that would not happen. But for me, as Sam, that is when everything changed. My job gave me my sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. It made me who I was. So for that reaction from my boss really hurt more than anything, because my boss knew me. He knew me really well. I was really good at my job. I didn't have any unauthorized absences. That was very, very unusual for me. He didn't want to acknowledge or address, why didn't you phone in? Why wasn't you at work? What had happened? He didn't even have the time to ask those questions. So I think if he'd have kind of made the effort just to listen, just to have taken me into a safe space, into the staff room, and sat down with me and had a conversation along the lines of, are you okay? That would have made a massive, massive difference. And it was from that point on that the control in that situation that I was in just increased, because I got no safe haven to go. There was no break from me and that perpetrator. I got nothing. And also it took away my financial independence. So I couldn't just leave. I didn't have any money to get anywhere. And he'd also isolated me from everyone. So it was really, really difficult to make that break. I think sometimes as well, when we're talking to our bosses and employers, I think they get really scared when we talk about domestic abuse, and they feel as though they've got to be a superhero and, save us. And we don't want that. Someone in that situation doesn't want that. We just want to be listened to. We just want to be believed. We just want to be heard. We don't need anyone to fix us or counsel us. We just want you to understand what's happening at home. And I think it's also important to understand that I could still do my job. I was still Sam, the legal secretary. I could still do the work that, I'd done for many years. It was somebody else's behaviour that stopped me from getting to work that day. It wasn't something that I'd done. And I often do a lot of reflecting on my own lived experience now. And I think one of the biggest things employers can actually do is just notice something about, a staff member. So, for example, as you can see there, my appearance has changed dramatically. As a legal secretary, my appearance was always immaculate. I was always in a suit. And then that changed. My body language, that changed dramatically as well, because I didn't know how to look at anyone, because every time I made eye contact with anyone, I was always accused of having an affair. So I never made eye contact. I would always look away. And I didn't know, I stopped knowing how to have a conversation with someone as well. It was always, okay. That kind of response, again, because the coercive control and controlling behaviour from that perpetrator, every time I did the normal, natural things that we do every day, there was always a consequence to pay. So I think those are some simple things that employers can take into consideration when a staff member makes a disclosure to them. I think it's really important not to dismiss them, definitely not to sack them. That wasn't the right course of action back then. And that's now obviously why I'm a proud ambassador for IDA, because it's got the free resources, it's got the tools there, everything's on their website, it's all free, and it just allows you to be able to support your staff through a really, really difficult situation.
Absolutely. And I'm just so sorry that you've had to experience all of that. I really am. It's absolutely horrifying and terrifying. And if we then look back to the stats that, 1 in 4 people in your current workforce, if you're a female, and 1 in 7 of you men could be experiencing this right now. And I think you're right. People don't necessarily want fixing. They just need to know that you've got their backs.
Absolutely. We want to know that we're not on our own. I never spoke out at the beginning because I thought this was normal. I thought this happened in all relationships. Right. But when I made that disclosure, his response meant that I never, ever opened up to any other professional ever again, because if my boss, who really knew me inside out, really, because I worked 5 days a week, 9 hours a day, if he was to treat me that way, then every other professional would be like that as well. So I never opened up again. So when somebody does make a disclosure, we have to act in the right and appropriate way, so that they, we can help them on their journey.
And I think that's such a valid point. You could be the first person that someone tells. And if you're equipped, you made a point there in terms of he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to handle it. And it could be, it could be anyone. I'm not saying, it just happened to be a man in this case, but it could be anyone. How do we equip ourselves? And I'm sure, I know Aisha's going to talk us through that in a minute, but you're right. I think that first bit of interaction is so vitally important for someone to then be able to share again, or then be able to trust. All the trust is gone, isn't it? All the self-confidence is gone. So to be able to build that with someone and make someone feel that they're heard even is so vitally important. So how did you then come to Stronger Beginnings?
So my situation was around 20 years ago now, and I set up a support group called SODA, Survivors of Domestic Abuse, and it's an online platform for people to come together who've experienced domestic abuse. And I love doing that, and I still do that work. But I set up Stronger Beginnings around 12 months ago now, and I deliver bespoke training packages to professionals to give them that knowledge and understanding of how to support someone in that situation. And I think it's just equipping them with all the things that I wish my boss had 20 years ago. And it's just keeping the conversation around coercive control and its impact going, because even though it's been a crime for a decade now, I still think that we don't understand it at all in its entirety. I think we need to keep having conversations like this, because there's people out there right now who might be experiencing domestic abuse, but they don't realise that they're actually experiencing coercive control. So I get a lot of people who say, oh, no, I'm not in an abusive situation because I'm not being hit. So it's as though we're waiting for someone to be hit first before we actually identify that they're experiencing coercive control. So with Stronger Beginnings, it's about making those connections with professionals so they can then, enhance their understanding to help the people that they work with and their clients as well.
Absolutely. And talk to me a bit more about this kind of the recognizing of coercive control, because I think that is really important. And I also think it's really interesting because when we're talking about the WPA, the Workers' Protection Act, a little bit earlier, and we talk about what is sexual harassment, there's a real kind of there's not a lot of education around that, about what it actually is. And I think this is the same with coercive control, isn't it? So, or even domestic abuse, how can people potentially recognize that they are in these situations?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult with coercive control, and often it's power and control. So basically that's what coercive control is. It's about someone who is so powerful that they can control every aspect of your life, and even your thoughts. Everything changes with that coercive control because it is so powerful, and that's how the cycle starts. It starts with that coercive control. And the reason perpetrators do that is because, for me, I lost my identity. I lost everything about Sam. So you don't even know what your favourite colour is. You're so scared you can't even make a decision. You're absolutely petrified, and it breaks you down piece by piece long before any physical violence, if any, come into that situation. And also with coercive control, we have to take into consideration the impact of coercive control. So with physical violence, there was physical violence in the situation I was in. I was strangled, I was beaten, I was kicked. But my coping mechanism was alcohol, because that numbed everything. But with coercive control, and when it's living subconsciously in your mind, it's really, really hard to kind of get it out and just get over it. So for me, it's been almost 20 years, and it's only within the last 2 years or so that I've started looking in a mirror, that I've started going out and socialising, that I've started buying new clothes, that I've started making a decision, because it was always those consequences that controlled and frightened me when I did those everyday things. So, for example, my dad would often ask me, do you want to go for a coffee? Most simplest question ever. It's either yes, please, or no, thank you. But I was still risk assessing everything. So I would wait, I would try and read his body language, and I would try and guess what he wanted to do. So my answer would always be, what do you want to do? And I didn't know this until one day he asked me, why do you do that? And it was because I was still scared of what the consequence could be. And I think that's why we still have to talk a lot about coercive control and its impact, even with jobs. I've had jobs since then, but some have been triggering. The office jobs that I've been for, they've been massive, massive trigger. I've had to leave some because of my mental health. And that is the power of coercive control. Even long after that situation, it can still have a massive impact on your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry that you're still being so impacted and affected by it, Sam. I really am. But thank you so much for sharing your story. Really, really powerful. So what can we do, Aisha? How can we equip employers across the country to join your movement and to get involved and to really support individuals who are going through this.
Yeah, thanks, Sally, and thank you, Sam. I mean, the IDA ambassadors we're so incredibly grateful for their support, because without their support and them sharing their experiences, we just wouldn't be able to have the impact we do. That's always the bit whenever we talk to employers that really gets people to understand why this is important and has the biggest impact, and also helps people to identify it in themselves when they recognize those own behaviors in their relationships. So thank you Sam, for all the work that you do. And also just to say, we're asking employers to take action and to support employees, but we're not expecting anybody here to be experts. There are so many specialist organisations that provide that specialist support. Really, it's about doing something and talking about domestic abuse, raising awareness of it, and then signposting specialist services. So I'm just going to talk through the 4-phase approach that we have created at IDA as a response to as how to create a really robust response within the organisation. This is set out in much more detail in the IDA handbook, which comes along with kind of other resources as well. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you are a member of IDA, and sign up if not. So the 4-phase approach, phase 1 is really about making the commitment and taking the first steps. So to do that, you need senior leadership support. It needs to come from the top of the organisation. This is it's a safety issue, it's a performance issue, it's a people issue. Quite often it starts within sort of the women's networks or other gender networks or other networks within the organisations, and perhaps an individual who has lived experience and they want to kind of bring in this work within the organisation. It comes from diversity, equity, inclusion teams and that space, and obviously that's why we're here today talking about this work. But it really needs to be overarching within the whole organisation. It's a business issue, and to do that it needs that senior leadership support. So really thinking about getting that sign off from the top, developing that business case, so thinking about the cost of the business, how it's impacting people, bringing all of that information together, and then using that to get that buy-in from that senior leadership as well. Thinking about a working group, so people across the organisation who could have input here. It shouldn't sit with one person. It needs to have input from various different departments or people that can have kind of input. So perhaps someone from HR, someone from the different networks, someone from payroll, security, IT, legal. If you may not have these different departments, but if you do, or you have an individual that works within them, bring those people into the working group so they can all have that different perspective, and also how it impacts people in different types of workplaces. So how somebody is impacted in an office environment, for example, is going to be different to how somebody is impacted in a shop or a public facing workplace, because they are directly at risk for members of the public coming into that environment. And then thinking about how you're going to implement that work over a 2 or 3 year plan. So how are you going to really embed it within the organisation? And then phase 2 is really about what you're going to do to implement the work. So are you going to have a policy or a written guidance? Are you going to do a launch, some sort of comms plan around this work to really keep raising awareness of it? Having a domestic abuse policy isn't like having a sickness policy or a maternity policy. Unless you know it's there, you're not going to go looking for it. So it needs to come alongside that awareness piece to really highlight to people that it's there. I mentioned before about champions. You might want to have some champions in the workplace. So those designated people who are trained to be able to respond and signpost people. Thinking about a training plan, and then any kind of internal or external support services as well. So once you've done that, you've thought about what you want to have in place, you go to phase 3, which is really embedding it within the organisation. So this is the part where you're making it business as usual, and you're trying to create that culture where people feel able to disclose and get the support. Do they believe that they are actually going to be listened to and going to be supported if they speak out? So, making sure that policy is reviewed and updated, how to embed it within all of the workplace processes. So in one-to-ones, in the return to work questions, in maternity processes, performance reviews, senior management meetings, really ensuring that it's constantly talked about and kept on the agenda. Making sure that training is kept up to date and refreshed. So do champions need to be retrained? Do HR need to be retrained? Line managers, etc. Does everybody within the organisation need to have some sort of awareness of this work? As soon as you start talking about domestic abuse within the business or the organisation, people will come forward and get support. That's guaranteed. Whenever we do an awareness session, people will always, come up to us at the end and talk to us about their own experiences, or we get feedback from the organizer that they had people disclosing. So really being prepared for disclosures when you start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And then thinking about how you might measure the impact as well. So can you have, is there maybe a staff survey you could do? Could you do tracks to the intranet page? Are you recording any disclosures that are coming in to really understand the impacts and the need and the impact of the work? And then the fourth phase is really about, once you've done all of that work internally and you've got an amazing robust support in place for your own people, what can you do as an organisation to really encourage others to do the same? So getting senior leaders to speak externally about this work and their commitment to this work to encourage others to, potentially becoming an IDA beacon or a strategic partner. Supporting customers as well. So interestingly, quite often we get employers coming to IDA to sign up when they start thinking about what they want to do for customers, support customers, and then realising they haven't got anything in place for their own people. So once you've got that support in place for your own people, then thinking about what can you do to support customers. Potentially supply chains, can you encourage your supply chains to have a domestic abuse policy or support in place? And then maybe some work in the community. So can you do some fundraising or working with some local charities as well?
Fantastic. I think
so. That's as I say, that's all set out in the handbook in a lot more detail. But that's kind of how we speak through the different ways of really introducing the response.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting sport in terms of customers. I think so many businesses now, and those who are kind of very customer facing, from a D&I perspective, they're always looking at it through the customer lens. So I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. And I also wondered whether organizations, if they think that they've got individuals within their workforce who are being impacted by domestic abuse, this could be a really good way to start bringing that in conversation in to the workplace, like from that kind of comms and engagement perspective, to show, even if someone hasn't disclosed but you suspect that they are in a situation like this, that the support is there. So I think it's it doesn't always have to be reactive. You can be really, really proactive with this work as well. So
that's a really good point, Sally. And also some people say that what's really powerful is having toilets in the posters in the back of toilet doors. Just printing them out, kind of old-fashioned way of raising awareness. But actually, if people are going into a physical workplace, it's obviously a private place for somebody to be able to find out what support is available, and also to learn a little bit about what domestic abuse is, like you say, to help them to recognise it in themselves.
I've seen it in the toilets actually. I'm on client sites all the time, so I've seen it in toilets in terms of the signs of domestic abuse. I really like the idea of having a tracker on that website though, so you can actually see how many people are looking at those resources. I think that would be really interesting to see. So thank you so much. So then, what is the call to action?
But just to end on the call to actions, this is actually an image taken from our conference that we did last year, where we were talking to, I think we had around 250 different employers in the room. Really, the call to action is to join IDA. There are no barriers to do so, so please do sign up and make use of all of the resources and come to the event. We'd love to see you there. Sign the HR charter if you're a HR professional, and again, you can access all of that information for free. Encourage your organisation to develop a domestic abuse policy or a written guidance. I talked about the kind of the power that a policy can have, and it's there, it's in black and white, somebody can see it and they know what support they're entitled to. Measure its impact, so really try and understand the impact it's having across the organisation. It's difficult to do this because you may not know if somebody is looking at the policy or looking at the domestic abuse services you signposted to, but find out from employees if they feel supported, if they feel safer in the environment that you've created, where you've tried to create that physical and psychological safety. and inspire others to do the same. So, you know, signpost people to IDA, talk about IDA when you can, you know, talk about it on an external platform. So can you do some articles with national press, local press, talk about the fact that you've introduced a domestic abuse policy. It will be received with a positive response. You know, it's a positive thing you're doing for your people, and you should be encouraged to shout about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We've had a question in from Ed. Thank you so much, Ed, for getting involved. He's asking, have you considered using your materials in male-dominated workplaces from victim and perpetrator perspective?
Yeah, so the materials that we share are, you know, we're an organisation that's kind of open to encouraging employers to support all of their people. So yes, in male-dominated workplaces, the support for victims and perpetrators, so victim survivors. Obviously, men are victim survivors too, so really encouraging those organisations to highlight the impact it has on men and the potential barriers to those men coming forward. So really trying to think about inclusive language to encourage those men to seek the support, and also potentially around male-dominated workplaces using raising awareness of abusive behaviours and types of abusive behaviours. So we've had conversations with a couple of different employers who are looking to do an awareness campaign of what those behaviours are, you know, trying to encourage their people, employees, to recognise them in themselves if they are actually using those abusive behaviours, and then signposting to services that can support them to change their behaviour or help them to change their behaviour. So Respect, for example, is a national organisation that works with perpetrators and provides behaviour changing programmes, so employers can signpost to those.
Incredible. And it's great to see that businesses are being so proactive in that space as well. So great question, Ed. Thank you so much. We're over time. I could talk about this all afternoon. It's you know, it's important. Number one, it's great to see the work that you're doing. It's really powerful to again, Sam, hear your story. It's encouraging to see that, you know, nearly 2,000 organisations have made this commitment. They're signing the charter and they're really kind of taking a proactive approach with this. I really hope that this session brings awareness so others do the same. You know, Aisha, Sam, Kristen, who's been also commenting, thank you so much. You know, they can all be found on LinkedIn, on Instagram, so please do reach out to them. And if you're interested or want any other kind of signposted support, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. So thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.